They say you can tell who holds the real power at a dinner table by who pours the wine and who throws it. My name is Amanda. I'm the founder and CEO of a tech company that took 5 years of sweat code and caffeine to build from scratch. But this story isn't about business. It's about a dinner, one plate of roast beef, one glass of red wine, and one woman who thought she could humiliate me into obedience. Her name is Judith Walker. 5 months ago, I was engaged to her son, Ethan. We had met at a fintech conference, bonded over systems architecture and bad coffee, and within a year, I thought I had found my match. Ethan was charming, intelligent, and seemingly supportive of my career. When he proposed with a vintage emerald ring, I said yes with the kind of naive joy that makes hindsight ache. He had mentioned his family in passing, old money, traditional. My mom's just a bit particular, he had said with a smile. She'll come around. I should have known better. The Walkers were more than particular. They were preservationists of privilege. Ethan's father ran a multi-million-dollar manufacturing empire. Their estate looked like it had been carved out of a movie set. Their name opened doors that most people didn't even know existed. Ironically, my company had recently secured a major contract with Walker Industries, one of the family's subsidiaries. They needed my team's software to upgrade their inventory systems. It was a big deal for us, 20% of our annual revenue big. The night I met Judith was meant to be a milestone, a formal dinner at the Walker estate. I wore navy conservative but confident. I rehearsed small talk about philanthropy, classical art, and travel. I told myself I'd be fine. I was wrong. Judith greeted me with a handshake like a paper cut and eyes that scanned me like a barcode. Her opening volley, Amanda, is it Ethan's told us so little about you. Throughout dinner, she sliced me apart with questions. Where was I from? What did my father do? He was a teacher. My mother passed away. What school did I attend? University of Illinois. Oh, she said, not Ivy. When I tried to explain what my company did, how we were working with Walker Industries, she waved it off. Business talk is so tedious at the table. Let's talk about children. You're not getting any younger. I kept smiling. I tried to stay composed, but inside I was boiling. Then came the final course and the final insult. Judith raised her glass of red wine, and with a tight smile, she flung it in my face. That's to disinfect a poor girl, she said. If you want to marry my son, you'll need to contribute a $200,000 dowry to the Walker Family Trust. Ethan laughed. He didn't look shocked. He didn't look angry. He looked entertained. That was the moment I knew I wasn't being welcomed into a family. I was being auditioned for obedience. Over the following days, Judith made her expectations clearer. Pay the dowry. Comply with additional system changes at my company, unpaid, of course. Show I was serious about the family. Ethan supported it all. Tradition, he said. You can afford it. What he didn't realize was that I could also afford to walk away. With the help of my best friend, my mentor, and a few good people who believed in me, I started untangling myself. I lined up new clients, documented every inappropriate email, reviewed the contract terms. We were within our rights to terminate. So I called a meeting. Judith walked into my office, assuming I was there to negotiate the dowry. Instead, I handed her a termination agreement. I returned the ring. And I told her that the $200,000 she demanded, I donated it to a scholarship fund for women in tech from underprivileged backgrounds. She threatened me, warned me I'd be blacklisted. But the only thing that got blacklisted was Walker Industries from our network, our boardroom, and from any future involvement in the company I built. Ethan tried to contact me once. I didn't answer. Today, my company is stronger than ever. We expanded. We diversified. We outgrew their influence. Judith tried to humiliate me over dinner, but now her son is alone and her contracts are gone. And I walk taller than ever, knowing my worth has never and will never come with a price tag. 3 days after the confrontation, the ripples began. I received an email from a senior executive at Meridian Global, the same person I had met with discreetly weeks prior. It wasn't just a replacement deal for Walker Industries. It was a strategic partnership, long term, and twice the size of the original. A week later, Frost Technologies followed suit. During our first call, their CTO said with a smirk, "We heard what happened. Frankly, it made us respect you more." There's something about standing up to power. It either terrifies people or inspires them. For me, it did both. Some doors quietly closed. Speaking engagements I had been booked for were suddenly rescheduled. A board advisor received a call from an investor, an old friend of Judith's, subtly asking if our company was facing instability. But something else was happening too. I began receiving messages, anonymous ones, from women who had married into families like the Walkers, from former employees of companies where power was currency and silence was the price of entry. One message simply read, "You have no idea how badly I needed to see someone say no. Thank you for reminding me I can still leave." That one stuck with me. Then Ethan tried again. Flowers, then a letter, handwritten, pages long. He said he hadn't realized the full extent of his family's behavior, that he was in therapy, that he wanted to unlearn what Judith had taught him, that he still loved me. He asked for a chance to explain. I agreed to meet. Neutral ground, a cafe in the South End. He looked thinner, tired, maybe sincere. He said all the right things about how wrong he had been, how much he missed me, how he admired my strength, how he wanted to fight for us. I listened. I nodded. Then I said the hardest thing I've ever had to say to someone I once loved. "I don't need someone to fight for me, Ethan. I needed someone to stand beside me, and you didn't." He looked down. "What if I'm ready now?" "Then be ready, but do it for yourself, not to win me back." We parted without drama, no tears. Just the quiet understanding that the bridge had burned and I had no interest in rebuilding it. Later that night, my phone rang. It was Richard Walker. His voice was slow, low, older than I remembered it. "I wanted to thank you," he said. "I watched my wife destroy good people for years, and I did nothing. But what you did took more courage than all of us combined." He told me he had moved out, that he was stepping down from Walker Industries, that maybe it wasn't too late to be someone his children could respect. Some people change, or at least they try. 2 months passed. We launched a new product line faster than expected, powered by a team more committed than ever. We won 2 awards, one for innovation and one for ethical leadership. They felt earned in a way awards rarely do. I was invited to speak at a leadership summit, the theme building without compromise. I stood on that stage in front of hundreds and told my story, not to shame anyone, not to scandalize, but to testify. I never said Judith's name. I didn't need to. What mattered was the message. Success means nothing if the cost is your voice. No opportunity is worth your dignity. And no relationship, business, or personal should demand silence in exchange for acceptance. When I stepped off stage, I wasn't alone. A line had formed. Women waiting not for autographs, but to say thank you. One had just broken off her engagement. Another had fired her biggest, most toxic client. Some just cried. Some just hugged me. I didn't start a movement, but I opened a door. And sometimes that's enough. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was clarifying. In the weeks after I severed ties with the Walker family, I did more than clean up contracts. I cleaned house. I looked inward and saw how deeply I'd let external noise, Judith's disdain, Ethan's indifference, even society's obsession with status warp my compass. I had been measuring my worth against a system that never intended to include me. So I stopped asking for a seat at their table. I built my own. The team at my company responded with an energy I hadn't seen since our first year. Maybe it was the drama. Maybe it was solidarity. Maybe it was just relief that we had finally taken a stand against something that had been slowly eroding our spirit. Whatever it was, we rallied. We overhauled systems, revamped operations, and reorganized leadership to reflect the people who had earned trust, not just titles. I launched a mentorship program quietly. No press, no grand announcement, just real one on one guidance for young women in tech, many of whom reminded me of the girl I used to be, full of ideas, hungry to prove herself, but unsure how to push past the gatekeepers. The 200 NOws I never paid to the walkers. It seeded a fund that would help dozens of these women avoid the very traps I had escaped. And then came San Francisco. I almost didn't go to the tech conference, too public, too exposed, too soon. But something in me knew this was part of the transformation. Not a postscript, but a new beginning. That's where I met Marcus, founder of a cybersecurity firm, former military, quiet, grounded energy. The kind of presence that doesn't try to occupy space, it holds it. He didn't flirt. He didn't try to impress. He listened. When I told him how I built my company, what I had walked away from, and what it had cost me, he simply nodded and said, "That sounds like their loss and my gain." It wasn't romantic. Not at first. It was real. It was mutual respect before chemistry. It was steady before passionate. And that was exactly what I needed. I didn't want another person who mistook my ambition for a threat. I wanted someone who understood that ambition, when rooted in purpose, was sacred. We built something slowly, carefully, privately. Back home, my company kept growing. We landed 2 new Fortune 500 clients. We opened a fourth office. I promoted my CTO to co founder. For the first time, I saw what it looked like to lead not out of fear or urgency, but from alignment. One morning, I opened my inbox and saw a headline: "She didn't marry the legacy, she built her own." My face was on the cover of an industry magazine. I laughed. Not because it was untrue, but because it was finally true in a way that needed no defense. I never heard from Judith again. But word got around. Richard Walker sent one final message. He had finalized the divorce, moved to a modest coastal town. He said, "It's quiet here, but honest. Thank you for being the stone that made the ripples." I don't know what happened to Ethan. I stopped asking. That chapter closed the moment I realized he never saw me as his equal, only as someone to fit a mold carved by his mother's expectations. But I know what happened to me. I became the version of myself I had once thought I needed a powerful family to become. I stopped waiting for permission to lead, to speak, to take up space. I no longer needed someone else's name to validate my work, because I had my own. And now I walk into every boardroom, every negotiation, every decision, not wondering if I'm enough, but knowing I am. Because dignity isn't a personality trait, it's a practice, a boundary, a discipline. And once you choose it, you don't forget how powerful it feels. I used to believe legacy was something inherited, handed down in ivory envelopes and marble estates, spoken through last names and whispered through generations. Now I know better. Legacy isn't inherited, it's constructed, quietly, day by day, decision by decision, and sometimes by the single moment you choose yourself instead of their world. A year had passed since I walked away from Judith Walker's table. 12 months since the wine, since the dowry, since the ring I had once worn like a promise, and now remembered only as a warning. My company had grown into something I never thought I'd see so soon. Not just in numbers, but in soul. We had become a lighthouse for clients who valued integrity over leverage. We worked with universities, nonprofits, and corporations that believed innovation was collaborative, not elitist. We had expanded into Europe, built a presence in Southeast Asia, and we were being approached by organizations that a year earlier would have ignored our emails. I had become somehow the face of something bigger than tech. I didn't set out to become a symbol. But when a woman publicly walks away from power, real generational intimidating power, and builds her own, instead people notice. especially the ones who've been waiting to do the same. At conferences, they lined up not to pitch ideas, but to share stories. Women, immigrants, first generation founders. They would pull me aside and say, "Your story made me quit. Your story made me stay. Your story reminded me I don't need to buy my place at anyone's table." That's when I realized something important. The world doesn't need more glass ceilings shattered in silence. It needs the sound of glass hitting marble and the voice that follows, "I built the floor beneath me." So I started telling the full truth, not just the parts that made me look strong, but the parts that still made my voice shake. I talked about how I'd almost paid the dowry, how I'd considered sacrificing my dignity for convenience, how I had told myself stories she'll come around. It's just culture. It's business because I didn't want to face the truth that love, when twisted by control, isn't love at all. And the more I told it, the freer I became. Marcus was there through it all. He didn't speak over my story. He didn't try to fix it. He held space for it. He once told me during a flight delay somewhere between Berlin and Montreal, "Your story doesn't scare me. It makes me respect you more. It reminds me that power, when shared, is strength. When hoarded, it's fear." We weren't trying to become power couple material. We were just two people from very different beginnings who had one thing in common. We had both walked away from something hollow and decided to build something solid. Together, but not dependent. It was Marcus who first said the words that would eventually shape my next chapter. What if we taught people how to walk away? Not just from relationships, but from boardrooms, from investors, from outdated rules. What if legacy isn't about staying, it's about knowing when to leave? That idea became the heartbeat of the initiative we launched 6 months later, Exit Worthy. A platform, a fund, a curriculum designed to help founders, leaders, creators, and yes, women identify when a situation, deal, or relationship is unworthy of them, to teach them not just how to fight for value, but how to protect their own. We partnered with business schools, mentored at incubators, spoke at global forums. And when I stood on the TEDx stage in Amsterdam and told the world I was asked to pay to become a walker, instead I became a builder, the standing ovation wasn't for me. It was for every person in the room who had once lowered their voice at a dinner table, smiled through humiliation, or rewritten their values to fit someone else's script. I wasn't done yet. That year, I wrote a book, not a memoir, a manifesto. The exit strategy when walking away builds the life you actually want. Publishers wanted a tell all. They wanted Judith's name. They wanted Ethan's texts. I gave them none of it. Instead, I gave them the blueprint, the strategy, the questions that helped me cut through the noise. Is this power or manipulation? Is this love or leverage? Is this opportunity or obligation in disguise? The book hit bestseller lists in 3 countries, not because it was controversial, but because it was permission. Something people didn't even know they were waiting for. Richard Walker sent me a note months after it published. "I read your book, all of it, every line. I was afraid you'd name us, but you didn't. You told the truth without cruelty. Thank you for that. I'm still learning." Judith never reached out, but I heard through circles that she'd stepped down from the foundation, that she was taking time to reflect, that her influence had waned, not because I fought her, but because she kept trying to play chess with people who had stopped showing up to her board. I don't hate her. I don't think about her with anger anymore. In fact, I think the opposite of love is not hate, it's clarity. And that's what I have now. Clarity that no table, no contract, no man, no amount of prestige is worth the erasure of who you are. That power isn't something you marry into, it's something you embody. That legacy isn't a family name. It's what happens when you live your values out loud and others rise because of it. Now, when I sit at a table, whether it's a board meeting, a mentorship circle, or just a quiet dinner with people I trust, I look around and I smile. Not because I belong, but because I built the damn table. And the wine, it's poured in peace. Because no one at this table needs to prove their worth. It began with a letter, not from Ethan, not from Judith, not from anyone I had ever met before. It arrived in a plain envelope, handwritten on thick cream paper. The penmanship was elegant, meticulous, every line as deliberate as the person who wrote it. Dear Amanda, you don't know me, but I know you. 2 years ago, I sat across from Judith Walker at the same dining table. My story ended differently because I stayed. I paid. I conformed. I lost years of myself inside someone else's version of who I should be. When I read your name in the Financial Times, I cried. Not because I was angry, but because I remembered who I used to be. You helped me remember. Thank you for doing what I didn't have the courage to do. I'm leaving now, not just them, but the version of myself I became to survive them. With gratitude, a former walker. I read the letter 3 times, then folded it neatly and placed it on my desk. That moment shattered something inside me, not a wound, but a wall. Up until then, I thought this story was about me, about my choices, my resilience, my rise. But it was never just mine. It belonged to everyone who had ever been asked to sit down, stay quiet, smile politely, and pay for the right to belong. So I started building again, not companies, not software, but exits. I launched a new project. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't profitable, it wasn't meant to be. We called it the Table Project. It was a foundation for those looking to leave: toxic families, controlling partners, oppressive companies, cultures that mistook silence for grace. We provided legal advice, transition housing, job training, peer mentorship. Mostly we provided permission to walk. In the first 6 months, we supported 87 people through exits they never thought possible. I watched women reclaim their voices. I watched men say no to legacies that were never theirs. I watched daughters unlearn obedience and sons reject inherited control. And the letters kept coming. One read, I stayed for my children until I saw that your story might give them a better mother. Another, I work in a firm owned by people like Judith. I'm writing my resignation tonight. But the one I'll never forget came from a young man in Italy. My mother was a Judith, and I was an Ethan. Thank you for helping me see her clearly for the first time. I wasn't changing the world. I was simply echoing back what the world had once tried to silence in me: that no seat at any table is worth your soul. The press noticed. They wrote about the Table Project like it was radical. Some called it dangerous, others called it necessary. We were invited to Davos, to UN roundtables, to corporate boardrooms where we told CEOs you don't keep talent by making them prove they deserve to be human. At a leadership gala in New York, a woman I'd never met approached me. She said I was there that night. The dinner. I was seated 2 rooms away. I remember hearing laughter. I had no idea you were being humiliated while we were sipping champagne. She paused. I just wanted to say I see you now. And I left my husband last week. Later that night, I took off my heels and walked alone along Fifth Avenue, the streets pulsing with light and life and noise. The kind of noise that used to drown me, now it carried me. I remembered the wine, the silence, the way Ethan had laughed while Judith had poured it on me like I was an object to be scrubbed. But I didn't feel rage. I felt reverence. Reverence for the version of me who stood up dripping and humiliated and said with her silence, never again. This story was never about Judith. Not really. It was about every person who was told they had to pay to belong. And every person who finally said no. Legacy is not what they leave behind for us. It's what we leave behind for those still coming. And mine will never be measured in names or titles or properties. It will be measured in every voice that once whispered, I don't think I can, and now declares I already did, because I chose to walk. And now so have they.